the March 23rd Half Moon Bay Planning Commission meeting. We have a couple of just items to point out. We are broadcasting this meeting live on channel 27 and on Pacific Coast TV's website as well. We do have a number of community members in attendance currently. We have about 12. They will have the opportunity, all of you will have the opportunity to speak this evening. Just a few etiquette items. The Planning Commission chair will open up and allow public comment. So during that time, for each item, you'll be allowed to speak. We'll recognize you by raising your hand. I believe everyone has a tablet or is on with a computer, but if you are on the phone, excuse me, you'll be pushing *6 to raise and unraise your hand and *9 to mute and unmute yourself. There will be 3 minutes given to each commenter, and there will be a timer that will show up on the screen. I wanted to let the public know that we did have 2 comments, and they were posted to the agenda on the website this afternoon, late this afternoon, and also were submitted to the Planning Commission prior to this meeting. I thank you for your patience for this remote access forum, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Chair Reddick to officially start. You're muted. You're muted. Chair Reddick. Sorry about that.
Gee, you think I would know how it works by now.
It's okay. It happens.
I did call this meeting to order and invite everyone to join in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Bridget, would you like to conduct the roll call, please?
Yes. Commissioner Benjamin?
Here.
Commissioner Gorn?
Here.
Commissioner Hernandez?
I am present.
Vice Chair Polgar?
Here.
And Chair Reddick.
I'm here.
All 5 planning commissioners are present.
Our first item of business tonight is consideration of the minutes for our meeting of March 9th. Are there any comments or corrections to that? If not, a motion to approve the minutes would be in order.
So moved. A second.
Thank you. A roll call vote, please, Bridget.
Commissioner Benjamin?
Yes.
Commissioner Gorn?
Yes.
Commissioner Hernandez?
Aye.
Vice Chair Polgar?
Yes.
And Chair Reddick.
Yes.
Motion passes.
This brings us to the public comment part of the meeting, which is at the beginning of every planning commission meeting, members of the public are invited to address the commission on any subject whatsoever that they might like to raise, with the exception of the 2 items that are on our agenda for just a little bit. So if you want to talk about either of those agenda items, please wait for the public hearing on those agenda items. But anything else, you're welcome to raise your hand and speak to the commission now.
I see no one.
All right, then I won't open the public comment session, and we'll go straight to agenda item number 1, which is the coastal development permit amendment for the Naples Beach sewer project. And I believe Mr. Doug Garrison will present to us on this.
Good evening. I'll get going here. For the record, I'm Doug Garrison, Senior Planner, City of Half Moon Bay. And for some reason, my PowerPoint's locked up. I'm going to stop and start over. Here we go. So this project, just for a little bit of background, it's a little bit different than most projects we see because it's already been approved by the city. In 2010, the planning director at that time approved a coastal development permit for the Naples Beach sewer upgrade replacement project. This included 2 phases, phase 1 and 2. Primary purpose was then and still is to divert sewage away from Mateo Creek. There is a main, sewer main that's attached to the side of the bridge, which, as everybody knows, is in deteriorating condition. The bridge is. So phase 1 was the larger part of this project. It's been completed. That one would divert approximately 90% of the sewage away from the bridge. Phase 2 has not been constructed, and that would remove the remaining 10% from the bridge. As that one was proposed, they would leave that main on the bridge, but not use it except in short-term emergency situations when they needed a backup when they were working on other parts of the sewer system. So right now, what we're really looking at is not phase 1 and phase 2, but an amendment to phase 2. So this is the part where instead of using that main on the bridge for backup, they are going to just discontinue that part of the proposal. And the other, frankly, the key issue here was it had been 10 years since this project was approved. The planning director, the staff planner have all moved on to other places. It just seemed like a good idea to have this in a public forum, publicly noticed hearing. It's something that probably a little bit of a gray area as to whether it would go to the planning commission normally. There was a CEQA evaluation in 2008. The Granada Community Services District prepared an initial study, mitigated negative declaration. That was adopted by the district, which was the CEQA lead agency. The city independently reviewed that document and relied on it in approving the coastal development permit. And I would note that the mitigation measures from that ISM&D still apply to this project. This I borrowed from the 2010 staff report. It's not entirely accurate. It's just to give a little reference to where the different pieces are. Phase 1 is the purple shaded area that's been completed. Phase 2 is a smaller area focused on Murata Road. If you go through the old CEQA document, most of the concerns were about phase 1, some of the work that was near there was a Roosevelt Ditch or Naples Creek, a little more sensitive habitat areas over there than what we're dealing with here. This is what's currently proposed. You can see the red line is where the sewer line would be. The yellow line is the area where the study area, when the environmental consultant, WRA, updated biological report for this. So the project begins at the western end of Murata Road, near where the pedestrian bike bridge is, extends up to almost Alameda Avenue, and then it tees off and goes down Ramona Way, which is an unimproved paper street that just looks like open space to casual observer. Extends down to Alcatraz Avenue, or will connect to existing facilities there. I would note there is an existing sewer line that goes from Alcatraz northward to San Andreas. That part will be replaced, and the 300 feet or so extending up to Murata Road will be new. We mentioned in this that there will be a tree removal. This is 2 Monterey pines looking, I'm going to go back for a second. If you look, This little house here is owned by State Parks. And these are the trees, just for reference. They are just a little bit north of where that house is. If you go through the old ISMND, it has language and discussion of potentially damaging some Monterey pines, and it has a mitigation measure that requires an arborist to implement a tree protection program, but it doesn't deal specifically with these two trees, and it doesn't really address what happens if the trees can't be protected. So we thought it would be a good idea to identify these specifically in this amendment. Normally, the city approves heritage tree removal permits if they're 3 and under. The planning director approves those. It's an administrative process. Again, we could have done it that way, but it just seemed better to put it right up front, wrap it into the amendment. The tree that's designated on the plans for removal is this one on the right, and it's not in very good health, a little bit smaller. This one is designated to be retained with protection measures. It's a little bit healthier, but does show some Monterey pine health issues. And they're separated by about 5 or 6 feet, and we weren't totally confident that it could be, the protection measures would be effective. So we've just said up to 2 trees could be removed. I would note that we spoke with the state parks ecologist on this. I believe they may be in attendance tonight. They noted that their long-range plans in that area were more for native coastal scrub habitat. They would prefer not to plant more trees there, especially Monterey pines. They did note that they could use some trees in some of the nearby state park campgrounds. The city is generally supportive of working with their ecologist in making that work. Similarly, any disturbed area from the trenching would have to be revegetated, and we, as noted in the staff report, happy to work with the state ecologist on what their long-range plans are for planting there. So for the permits, when you change something to an approved project, that requires an amendment. Some of those the planning director can just sign off on if they're very minor. Some of them it's a little more formal, and then bigger ones go to the planning commission. I said in this case, it just seemed prudent to send this one to the planning commission, sort of regardless of how substantial the change was. So to be clear, phase 1 and 2, they're already approved. They're not really the focus of the meeting so much as the proposed change to the project and any changes to the site that have occurred in the last 10 years. Just from a coastal permitting standpoint, this does not increase the capacity of the sewer. It doesn't open up new residential development. It's really just to get the untreated sewage away from Medeo Creek. And as I went in a little detail, there's the 2 trees. We did add some new conditions specifically to this amendment. As noted in the staff report and in the resolution, the approved resolution with conditions and mitigation measures still apply. We did add some conditions, notably to requiring a coastal access program. The applicant has agreed to only have work Monday through Friday, so they'll free up parking spaces for beach visitors because they're in pretty short supply in that neighborhood. Also the staging area, they'll limit the amount of materials kept there. We have gotten a couple of calls, people wondering about this, more so about the bridge replacement than the actual sewer part. And just to be clear, that's a different project. San Mateo County is the lead on that. They have submitted a coastal development permit application directly to the Coastal Commission. It's pending. And they also prepared an initial study mitigated negative declaration, which the County Board of Supervisors adopted on January 7th of this year. So from a CEQA standpoint, under CEQA guidelines, section 15162, essentially if you already prepared an EIR or mitigated negative declaration and it's been certified or adopted by that jurisdiction, no additional environmental review is required. But it is CEQA, so there are some exceptions. You do have to show that there have not been any changes in the project or in the baseline conditions that would cause a new significant impact or increase a previously identified impact to a significant level. And so as part of this, we required an update of the biological report that had been prepared for the original approval. They found no new impacts. The conditions are very similar to what was evaluated previously. In terms of discontinuing the use of that sewer main on the bridge, if anything, that's probably a beneficial effect given the current condition of the bridge. So the existing CEQA document was found to be adequate and complete. No additional CEQA review is required, and all of the mitigation measures from that document still apply, although some of them were specifically applicable to phase one, so we're sort of sorted through some of that. So in conclusion, phase two has now become a high priority due to the deteriorating condition of the bridge. San Mateo County closed the bridge several months ago because of that. And it's, I think, in everybody's benefit to just get the sewage off of that bridge. So that was the objective 10 years ago. It's the objective today. The amendment to not use that as a backup system is, if anything, beneficial at this point. If you read back through the 2008 CEQA document, there's some language about if it wasn't used as a backup, it could increase the potential for accidental spills. But then it goes on to say that if at any time the condition of the bridge deteriorates, that the district shall just discontinue use of it. The cost benefit of it just doesn't make sense. So the only real changes, we've added some new conditions to this resolution. As I mentioned, we've got a coastal access plan requirement to keep that area free for people visiting on weekends, peak times. Minimize the use of the staging area, which is located right on the shoulder of Marauder Road on the south side. That's shown on the cover sheet of the plans. It's limited to 4 vehicles for workers during the week when they're working. Otherwise, they'll get together offsite and carpool there. Also limiting the amount of trailers and other equipment, materials that are stored there to, again, just free up as much parking as we can there. We've updated some of the language. There was a mitigation measure dealing with if you discover cultural resources, archaeological materials. A lot of the state law on that has changed over the years. And so the language we have in our just standard condition of approval has more teeth in it than the old mitigation measure does. And so we're leaving that mitigation measure alone, but we added our standard condition, which not only talks about having the mitigation measure requires an on-site archaeologist to do monitoring during construction, but it's a little bit weak on what happens if something is discovered. The newer language says you have to stop and put some teeth into what you have to do before you can restart. There are some standard conditions that are required by the Regional Air Quality District for dust control. That's a standard condition for us. So we've added those kinds of conditions that are specific to this amendment, and largely just because of sort of a little bit different best practices today. For public comments, it's been pretty quiet. I had a couple of phone calls from neighbors, and they were really more interested in what was happening with the bridge than with the sewer. We did get one written comment that was forwarded to the Planning Commission earlier today from the Casamira Homeowners Association. Their comment was that they would like to make sure that the project would not prevent Ramona Way from functioning as a street in the future. They want to have that option there. The response to that, I think, not to get overly speculative, almost every street in Half Moon Bay has a sewer underneath it. It's very common practice, not just in Half Moon Bay, but everywhere. So certainly from an engineering standpoint, it's certainly feasible to have a sewer there with, you know, a paved road over the top of it using accepted engineering practices. At this point, the city does not have a plan to put a road there. If we did, we would go through the same process that anybody else does for coastal development. We would have to go through permitting, CEQA review, look at a wide range of potential impacts. The fact that there was a sewer there would probably be the least of our problems at that point. So staff recommendation is to approve the coastal development permit amendment, which allows modifications to phase 2 of the previously approved coastal development permit, which was file number PDP 012-10. So that concludes my recommendation. I would note that we have a representative from Granada Community Services District available. There's a representative from WRA, the environmental consultant, that updated the biological work. And I think there may be an ecologist from state parks that can answer any questions about what their objectives and planning goals are for revegetation in that area.
Thank you, Doug. Commissioner Benjamin.
Thank you. Good evening, Doug. Thank you for the report. There were just a couple of questions. The Naples Beach Pump Station, that's the one on San Pablo, right near the west end of San Pablo Street. Sorry?
Yes.
Right. Okay. And I had a look at I dropped by that site, and it looked like there was some more equipment that was there since the picture that I saw in the original EIR back in 2010 or 2008 or whenever it was done. So they've done some improvements there. Were those in conjunction with the phase 1, or was that an independent development, and what ramifications, if any, does it have for this project?
Well, I'll let the representative from Granada confirm that, but the original approval, it included upgrading the pump station, replacing the pumps, and some other things there that were above ground. So that was part of the original approval. And I think the photographs were the before, showing what it looked like before they did the work. If I'm wrong about that, I'm sure John Rayner from the district can correct the record.
I'm confident that that's right. Let me ask one other question, and then if he has additional insight, I'd appreciate it. So you had mentioned, if I understood the presentation correctly, that a sewer line in this area was going to be renewed, an old section of sewer line. Was that the bit on Ramona Way, or was that the bit that would run along on San Pablo?
not sure I follow the question.
So in your presentation, you mentioned that there was an old section of sewer line that was going to be replaced. Was that the stuff that ran on the paper street?
Yes, on the paper street, if you go from San Andreas Street northward to Murata, it's about 300 feet. That would be a new section that connects the existing section to the south with the new sewer on that would be put in Murata Road.
Right, okay. And the section of Main that runs along, if I'm reading the diagram right, once you get to San Pablo Road, the pump station looks like it has some sewer facilities that are running along San Pablo Street. Is that right? The arrows that are running along underneath San Pablo?
My understanding is there was work there in phase one. My focus has been more on just the Murata Road, Ramona Way part.
The only reason I ask about that is that I wondered about the condition of those lines, because they're the ones that are going to see any incremental load from the 10% modification first. And if they're in good condition, great. If they're in somewhat older condition, it would be good to hear that they're capable of handling the load.
Well, I will defer to the sewer experts from Granada when we get to that section of the meeting.
I have no other questions.
Vice Chair Polgar.
Thank you very much, Doug, for the presentation. I think I may be following up on Commissioner Benjamin's question. Along those lines, I'll be honest, I didn't exactly understand what the difference, what would be happening differently with the kind of the flow of the wastewater. And so I wanted to make sure that maybe this is a question more for Winter, that as a commission, we're not deciding on the merits of the functionality of how it will function that compared with the original phase 2 approach. Does that make sense? I'll be honest, I don't know that I had enough information to make a decision based on that. I didn't have objections. Like, I understood everything else. It was just more that, like, I didn't exactly understand the difference between what would be happening with that 10% that was previously going to go on the bridge or something. And so I still don't. And so I'm a little uneasy because, and I kind of got the impression that maybe I'm not the only one who's not entirely clear on all the details, but maybe I am. And so my question is more along lines of, are we making a decision, about do we have to decide upon whether it's actually the right approach engineering wise? Does that make sense?
I'm happy to jump in, and then Doug, if you want to follow up. No, you're not being asked to make any engineering decisions. This is really, as I understand it, the modification is the original project left open the use of this old stretch of pipe as sort of a backup system. And because that backup system is now no longer going to be feasible because it's part of the system that's going to be taken down when that bridge comes down, the change is really just to say, well, that we're no longer going to have that backup. Instead of having a valve that would allow the use of that old pipe, we're just going to use all of the new system and not rely on the backup. But Doug, please feel free to clarify if I've misstated anything.
I believe that's correct. To get to Commissioner Polgar's question about the 10%, diverting that 10% was part of the original phase 2. To clarify that the existing plans to divert that into the new sewer lines and existing, that part is unchanged as far as day-to-day operations. The only thing that's really changed is whether you have some redundancy from having that section available if you need to divert sewage while you're doing maintenance work on some other part of the system. But again, given the condition of the bridge, that's kind of a moot point now.
Thank you. That was it.
Very good. Other clarifying questions from commissioners? If not, we could invite the representative from the Granada district to elaborate on Doug's response to Commissioner Benjamin. If he chooses to.
Hi, I'm John Rayner. Good evening. I'm the district engineer for Granada Community Services District, and I've served in that capacity for about 20 years. So I was involved in the first phase of this project and in the environmental studies that were done for the project. The questions in terms of the capacity, there's plenty of capacity in the existing system to handle this 10% of flow. The reason that we have, if you're in the unimproved section there between Marauder Road and San Andreas, as Doug said, that's going to be new sewer. We don't have a sewer there. We do have a sewer from San Andreas to Alcatraz, but in order to make this project work, it's a gravity sewer. So we can't change that. And it turns out that the existing sewer between Alcatraz and San Andreas was too shallow. And so we're just replacing that sewer between those two streets. We're just deepening it so that we can flow by gravity, and we don't want to have a pump station. The question on the pump station that's on San Pablo, there were no real changes at that station. We did put in a new valve box. We did upgrade the standby power system so the pump station would continue to function during PG&E power outages. We put, I think, a system in there where we could actually pump around the pump station if for some reason even the engine generator didn't work. We'd be able to, with Sam's assistance, pump through there. And it pumps in a brand new force main. The line that the arrow that's going, I guess, east up San Pablo Street goes up to Alameda and it jogs over to Roosevelt. That's a brand new sewer line that was put in as part of phase one. So that's brand new pipe. So it's going to be good for many more years. If you have any other questions or I missed something, I'd be glad to try to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Rayner. Any other questions for Mr. Rayner while he's here?
Well, since you're here, given the recent events that have happened to many people in Texas, where extreme weather conditions wiped out water and sewer, are there, since when you originally created this project, are there new extreme weather conditions that you'd be worried about for what you've put in place? Are there other mitigation measures that you think we really should be looking at as part of this that weren't envisioned when this project started?
Honestly, I can't think of anything on this kind of a project. We're certainly not in a flood area. We do have, as I mentioned, another way to pump from the San Pablo pump station in case there's a problem with the pumps or the engine generator and there's no power. So I think we've pretty much addressed anything that would be associated with climate change. So I can't think of anything.
Thank you.
Commissioners, any other clarifying questions? Well, I don't see any, so I will open the public hearing on this item and welcome any members of the public attending to comment on this.
Seeing none.
All right, I will close the public hearing and invite commissioners' discussion. Commissioner Benjamin.
Thank you, and thank you, John, for the answers to the questions. Those were sort of what I expected, but I just a little housekeeping because I couldn't tell from the pictures. So thank you for reading the diagram to this non-sewer engineer kind of guy. And I appreciated Commissioner Hernandez's question about climate issues. Alcatraz, I believe, was the location where we lost a substantial amount of bluff a few years back. Maybe I've got it wrong, but it's hard to envision this project making things any worse given the deterioration at Medio Creek. So, you know, I think there's a concern out there, but I don't know how to address it other than a much larger scale project that's beyond the scope of this phase. But I do appreciate the question and a good heads up from him, since that area has seen some bluff retreat. I think that this is an entirely appropriate project that I will be supporting. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Benjamin. Vice Chair Polgar.
I also appreciated Commissioner Hernandez's question. Actually, one question is, what is the kind of life of this pipeline? I know nothing about sewer pipelines, so I mean, eventually the bluff will retreat, but I mean, there's a lot of time. I mean, it's not going to happen so quickly. So I would assume that this project, there's nothing, you know, inappropriate about it. And I agree, I will be supporting this project. But I was just out of curiosity, do you know the life of the pipeline?
You asking me? Typically, sewers have a life of about at least 75 years and over 100. This is going to be a newer material, fewer joints. It's probably going to outlive us all, I'm sure.
Thank you, Mr. Rayner. Commissioner Hernandez.
Thank you. And thanks to John and Doug and the rest of city staff for a thorough evaluation of this project and a dig through the archives. I always appreciate when I see good government on exhibit, especially when, as referenced before, the price for bad government is so obvious in other places. So really appreciate everybody being thorough, thoughtful, and I really also appreciate the city staff's position of when in doubt, let's just bring it to the Planning Commission. I think it's a good policy and I'm supportive of that generally. With respect to the amendment, I'm supportive of it. I think replacing the trees is a great policy, especially the way you've written that up. The location doesn't really matter to me. I do think that from what I've recently learned about local plants, coastal scrub does seem like a much better fit than trees as a replacement in the immediate area. So yeah, I think overall, I feel very supportive of this project, and I think we should try to do what we can to get this completed before the bridge does finally collapse. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Commissioner Hernandez. Any other commissioners' comments? Oh, Commissioner Gorn.
I have no problem.
You jumped around in my gallery, so I lost you for a moment there.
I have no problem with this. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Vice Chair Polgar.
I'd forgotten to mention that I agree with Commissioner Hernandez on working with the state parks to you replace the trees where it makes more sense, and allow them to, do coastal prairie restoration here. So I just wanted to voice my support with that as well.
Good deal. Commissioner Benjamin.
Yes, to that point of the trees, I just want to point out that under Bolsa Chica, I wouldn't characterize the trees as a mitigation per se, because it's going to be in a different place. I think the mitigation of improving the coastal scrub makes a lot of sense here. And I certainly applaud the planting of trees in places that State Park likes it better. But I want to just make a note that, maybe Winter has a different view, and I'd certainly take my schooling here if that's appropriate. But I would hesitate to mitigate an impact here with a project in another location.
Does staff care to comment on that, or?
I can. Specifically, we're not calling it mitigation in particular for habitat loss, which gets kind of into the question of Bolsa Chica. If you replace X number of trees, does that actually mitigate the impact? In this case, in the CEQA document, the potential damage to trees wasn't about their value as habitat or biological resource. It was in a section of the checklist where they're talking about complying with city requirements, for example, heritage tree preservation. And I said that mitigation measure was kind of waffly and may not even apply to this corner. We have standard conditions that we apply to our heritage tree removal permits. So I don't think it would be construed as mitigating an impact. It's just compliance with our tree ordinance is really what it is.
Yeah, I'm very comfortable with that. And I sort of thought that, but I just wanted to get it in the record and make it clear that we weren't thinking of it in that other ways. And I didn't think you did. Thank you. You haven't commented, Commissioner Chair Reddick. Do you want a resolution motion, or do you want to comment?
Well, my brief comment is that I echo Commissioner Hernandez's praise of staff for doing a thorough job on this, and when in doubt, being extra careful about the public's business and bringing it to Planning Commission. And I also like the resolution with state parks regarding the trees. And I thank Mr. Rayner for making time to be here to help with our process. And if there are no other commissioner discussions, then we could entertain a motion.
I make a motion.
What happened to Rick?
All right, I'll make. I think he's having trouble with the internet. I think because he went off earlier. But
hang on, he might be. Did he fall over here? No, I don't see him. Yeah, I think he fell off by accident. Oh, all right.
Well, sort of anticlimactic.
I can move that we approve the resolution PDP-21-015. Is that am I in the right? Yes, that's it.
Yeah.
Commissioner Benjamin has seconded or pleaded for peace, one or the other. It would be nice.
I should be on the record. I second motion.
I can hear you, but yeah, he's coming back. There he is.
Great.
Okay.
Rick, we had a motion and a second when you disappeared.
I heard everything. I got moved to an attendee.
Okay.
I guess Jimmy wanted to be the one who submitted the motion. So.
Okay, roll call. Commissioner Benjamin.
Yes.
Commissioner Gorn.
Yes.
Commissioner Hernandez.
Aye.
Vice Chair Polgar.
Yes.
And Chair Reddick.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. Our next item of business is the 2021 Measure D rankings ratifications. And I believe Ms. Brittany Casalino, or I'm sorry, Jill, were you signaling?
Yeah, thank
I'm
you,
sorry.
Chair. I am going to go ahead and kick this one off, and then you will hear from Brittany in just a couple minutes here. We want to make sure we have our.
I'm sorry, Winter is, sorry to interrupt, but Winter is signaling.
She
Yes,
is,
through the chair, I just wanted to make sure that I notified Sarah Clark that.
We need to bring Sarah
take
in
a
as a
moment.
panelist.
yeah, we're waiting for Sarah. And
Yeah, I'm looking for her, so.
okay.
Should we adjourn? Should we adjourn for 5 minutes while we wait for Sarah?
Well, I guess that would not be unreasonable. Does anyone object to a quick 5-minute recess? All right, let's come back at 7:55, please. Jill, go ahead.
All right. Good evening, Chair Reddick, Commission, and our attendees tonight. You have quite a few folks we believe are here for this particular item. And Brittany, if you can go ahead and start the presentation. Thank you. So this item is very timely relative to the city subdivision ordinance. We have until April 1st as staff to rank the Measure D applications that were received prior to January 31st at the beginning of this year. Last year, we brought kind of had a test drive, and we brought rankings to you, but we ended up not having a lack of allocations. We broke even, so we did not have to dip into scoring and actually making some choices amongst applications. But tonight you do, and we'll dig into that a bit. And you have staff here to answer your questions. But I want to frame a couple things before we get going. So at the end of this meeting, or at the end of our presentation, Sarah Clark, our Deputy City Attorney, who has come in now to cover this item, will give us a bit of a status update with respect to Measure D relative to state housing law, as well as the applicability of Measure D to accessory dwelling units. These are questions that have come up in the past, and in fact, you received a written correspondence about this item tonight from one of the Measure D applicants who had some concerns about these things. So we want to make sure that we cover that if that would help the commission to have that context. We also want to remind everyone in the room that Measure D allocations are not entitlements. They are only the opening of the door to then processing entitlements for new housing units. So there are a number of different processes that would apply to the wide variety of units that are put forward here tonight because of the kind of unit they are or because of the location where they are. Measure D allocations and granting them does not dilute the process for coastal development permit review relative to any zoning district or any Coastal Act requirements such as ESHA or visual resources, etc. So we just want to reassure people about that, and just keep in mind what this is really about is Measure D allocations. Next slide, please. So tonight we're going to follow your typical process, and I do want to make a note, and we know that our wonderful Chair Reddick will help us, as well as Bridget, with a timer. But I just want to say this to our community members, our applicants who are here tonight, who might not be accustomed to speaking in public comment with the Planning Commission. The Commission is not going to engage in a discussion about this. Your public comment will be a 3-minute period, and the Commission will listen very, very attentively, and staff will take a lot of notes. And then once that public forum is over, if there's a need for staff to provide clarifications or answers, we will do that, and the Commission will, of course, certainly consider your input and may even discuss it. But we just know that in the Zoom format, we've had a few people who aren't accustomed to this and have wanted to have discussions, and that's not what we do during our public hearing. With those little housekeeping items, I will get out of the way. Brittany Cozzolino, your associate planner, is going to give the presentation that gives a highlight of your written staff report for this item.
Thank you, Jill, and good evening, commissioners. So just to give a little refresher on what Measure D is, this is our annual growth control measure that was approved by the Half Moon Bay voters in 1999. It was then codified and approved as an ordinance by City Council and certified by the Coastal Commission into our local coastal program and went into effect in 2010. So the growth control is done through limits on new dwelling units each year based on the previous year's population increase plus the base population. So there are there's a 1 to 1.5% increase that can occur, and this is divvied up into a defined downtown and outside of downtown area. And the code for Measure D lives in our subdivision ordinance and provides very specific scoring criteria for when we are in the case that we are tonight, where we have received more applications than there are allocations available. And this scoring criteria was developed with a very solid foundation based on early green building codes and policies, but has not stood the test of time and did not fully anticipate the ADU landscape that we are working in today. Sorry, that's my bird clock. So we have seen some room for improvement, which I will touch on soon. So as Jill mentioned, we went through this process somewhat last year. We did receive more applications and allocations and went through the process of scoring. And then when we were about to bring those recommendations to the Planning Commission, we did have a applicant withdraw such that all applications were able to be approved, and we did not need to have the Planning Commission ratify the scores, as you will be tonight. But this provided a really great opportunity for staff and the Planning Commission and the public to talk about the criteria of the scoring checklist and clarify some of the challenges and the tricky language that is very specifically written out in our code. So for example, there are several criteria that we found to apply to all applicants equally because of state laws that have come out since the checklist criteria were written into our code, such as state mandated water conservation laws and stormwater runoff regulations. So we are here tonight making the best that we can out of the code that we have. Staff has noted a number of different opportunities that we have ideas for updating this code to better align with city priorities and better meet our housing needs in the city. But unfortunately, we cannot apply what we would like to do with Measure D tonight. We are working with what we have. So just to overview what is in front of you tonight, we did not receive any downtown applications yet this year. There are 44 allocations available. There are 22 allocations available for that defined outside of downtown area. And we received requests for 29, so 7 more than are available. And the breakdown of those is listed here. We have several standalone single families, several projects with single family with an ADU, and the majority are for just ADUs. And then we did receive 3 separate requests for junior ADUs or JDUs, not counted in that 29 total here. But these did not qualify and are not before you tonight because they were proposed to include new floor area, which does not meet the state definition of a junior ADU. Those must be entirely within the footprint of an existing residence. To just overview the scores briefly, the scoring was really tight. There was a very small range of scores. You will see one outlier at the top with a unit that was proposed for below market rate. That was an additional 35-point bump. But for the most part, the scores were fairly close and were improved by being or including an ADU or being walkable close to public services, public transit. And then the other end was the standalone single family residences that did not score quite as well. So those are all summarized in Exhibit A. You'll see the 22 allocations that are recommended for certificates at this time at the top in green. And the 6 applications, 7 total allocations that are not proposed for this time, we have already reached out to these applicants, encouraging them to come talk to us and figure out what their next options, next steps might be, and Jill will address next steps on this slide.
Thank you, Brittany. So we're coming to the conclusion of this staff report here tonight. The Planning Commission is, as we already described, being asked to ratify what was presented to you in your staff report. Your decision is final unless it's appealed, and then it would be brought to the City Council. The next steps for our applicants, there is a potential for transfers in September. Last year, we had quite a few applications for transferring. They were all ADUs, and there were more applications for transfers than available downtown allocations that could be transferred. Only the base allocations for downtown are transferable, not the bonus allocations. We didn't get into the nits of that in our presentation, but if you have questions about that, we're happy to answer those. The Measure D ordinance sits in the subdivision code, and it does not provide a lot of guidance for the transfer process. And we decided to come out tonight with some real specific ideas here to help our folks do this really well. It was difficult to do last year. We were in kind of the early months of the COVID stay home orders and working remotely, and our applicants were working remotely and submitting everything online. And we got a lot of applications just right up to the wire of needing to bring them to the City Council. City Council is supposed to consider these in September. we need a little time with them to review them and to, in this case, we would like them to be scored again, just in the event that City Council would benefit from seeing the scores if they were to consider any of them for transfers. We don't know right now if there's going to be more allocations requested than transfers available. We also don't know if City Council is going to transfer any or some, because this is a discretionary act of City Council, and this is something we've been very clear with our applicants about. So we're going to be putting some materials up on our website requesting that these applications come in by August 1st, so that we at least have a month to work through them and score them and request these checklists. The application window then after that is for, right now, the way that we're codified is for January 31st, 2022 for next year. And so those are kind of the two milestones that our applicants want to know about, and we really want to get the word out. So we'll work on that. Next slide, please. So Brittany was talking about some things about Measure D. We also note that the ADU ordinance is one that we are really looking to update, and we think that they're very, very related. As you can see, many, the majority of your applications are for accessory dwelling units. Late in 2019, the Planning Commission reviewed an updated accessory dwelling unit ordinance that would have been compliant with state law as it came into be on January 1st, 2020. City Council considered that ordinance in public hearing. They were seeking additional input from the Coastal Commission, and the Commission did give some very broad input in April, I believe it was. And then the Department of Housing and Community Development has also now provided a guidance document about the 2020 and now the any other changes to the ordinance since then, came out at the very, very end of December 2020. So we have the benefit now of these two guidance documents to go back to the draft ordinance and look it over. And our intent is to bring it back to City Council to try to get a compliant ordinance with state law so that we can use a city ordinance instead of having to jump out to state law, which is it's more difficult to administer. So relative to that, we see opportunities for updating Measure D. This does not involve the ballot language. So we want to be clear that there's some boundaries around what your staff would be working on. Primarily, we'll focus on the scoring system that is really the subject of tonight. And we have some ideas about how to align the scoring system with City Council priorities and with the recently Planning Commission recommended and City Council adopted land use plan update, the policies in that document currently pending Coastal Commission certification. So we see these as kind of sister ordinances that could come together, maybe one right after the other or at the same time, and we intend to work on them very soon. So tonight, of course, you're focused on the ratification, but if you have input, having gone through this staff report materials about either of these items, we'll be making a note of it and paying attention as we work on those ordinances. I did mention at the very beginning that Sarah Clark, our Deputy City Attorney, could provide some more information about Measure D relative to state housing law, as well as Coastal Commission guidance about Measure D and accessory dwelling units. And I think this is the right time to do that.
Thank you, Jill, and good evening, Commission. So these two topics relate to the question of whether the city's Measure D system, which is a growth control ordinance, has been preempted by state law. and they're closely intertwined. There was recent legislation, SB 330, which puts constraints on the ability of jurisdictions to have growth control ordinances in place for new residential development. Likewise, there's a provision in the ADU ordinance indicating that jurisdictions should not apply growth control ordinances when they're processing applications for accessory dwelling units. And so some members of the public and others have commented, why is the city continuing to apply Measure D, both specifically to ADUs as well as in general? And the reason why is because of Half Moon Bay's unique location in the coastal zone and the Coastal Act's, the tie-in between Measure D and protections under the Coastal Act. The direction that we've received from the commission and that the city agrees with is that Measure D was intended to address impacts to Coastal Act resources, particularly those that are impacted by additional growth within the city. And in particular, the concern around traffic and impacts that traffic has on the ability of the public to access Half Moon Bay's coast. And so the direction we've received from the commission, and this was specifically with regards to ADUs, is that because Measure D is a mechanism for implementing protections to Coastal Act resources required by the Coastal Act, the city can and should still continue to apply Measure D both to the ADU context. And in that particular area, we have explicit Coastal Commission guidance from 2014. But the same reasoning applies to new laws adopted in the last legislative session, specifically SB 330. So overall, while we are aware of these provisions in state law that make it look like the city should be exempting ADUs or exempting all residential development from the application of Measure D, it's really because of Half Moon Bay's unique position in the coastal zone and the fact of Measure D being recognized as one mechanism for ensuring that the city continues to protect important Coastal Act resources, that we can continue to apply this growth control ordinance in this context. So I'm happy to answer any further questions about that if the commission has any, but I wanted to provide that general overview given that we have had comments from the public about it regarding these items.
Thank you.
Through the chair.
Commissioner Hernandez.
So I had a couple of questions coming into this. The first one was, does what we're doing conform with the law? And I think you've affirmatively answered that. And I think that it's helpful to think about the fact that part of what we're trying to do is protect Coastal Act resources through Measure D. So I really appreciate that thoughtful response. My second question is about the scoring system. And my question is, has city staff established arbitrary guidelines, or do we feel like we have a sound footing here for the way that we've implemented the scoring? And related to that, I noticed there's a tie for last place, right? And I'm curious how we broke the tie on those two projects that scored a 98. So those are the questions that I'm interested in understanding a little bit more about.
Would staff like to respond to Commissioner Hernandez, or would you like us to take more clarifying questions and batch them together?
I think it would be good to batch them, and we were at the cusp of just, you have a recommendation tonight. We're wrapping up our presentation here, and we're glad that some of what we've presented has answered your questions in advance. We expect the commission to have plenty of questions, so we're ready to cover those, but I would like to batch them. I think it would be helpful for us to hear a bit of a range of your questions.
Yep, makes sense. Commissioners, other clarifying questions? Commissioner Benjamin.
Thank you, Chair Ruddick. So I know that this is not an entitlement, as the presentation said. It's sort of a ticket to begin the entitlement process, these Measure Ds. I would imagine that at some point they would be entering the sort of pipeline, not to be confused with our last agenda item, that we track the progress of different kinds of housing for the benefit of showing HCD that we are trying to conform with their rules. And is it your sense is that these things would begin showing up on the pipeline or flow chart or whatever the right term for it is, beginning with the next report, the one in 2021, or maybe these are already in the Measure D application section of our report. It's been 2 weeks since we saw it and I've forgotten. I'm getting older. And maybe as a follow-on, I'm sorry, I apologize. I was checking my notes again. Having a sense of where these units fit with respect to where our current cycles RENA deficits are, if you like. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other clarifying questions from the commissioners? I don't see Vice Chair Polgar at the moment.
She actually just is having some technical difficulties. She just turned her camera off just to save for her connection. She's having a bit of a connection issue, but she can hear everyone.
Through the chair, I can vamp while she comes back.
Commissioner Hernandez, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I noticed one of the properties, 111 Red Hawk, is in a planned unit development, Pacific Ridge. Do we have clear, so again, going back to the arbitrary question, conforming with the law, is it clear cut that we're allowing ADUs in a PUD? So that's the other question that I have to top off all of my other questions. And then this isn't I have another item, but it's not a clarifying question. It's just more of a discussion item when we get to that. So those are all of my questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Benjamin?
Yes, while Commissioner Polgar is returning to video land, at the conclusion of the staff report, we talked about there was interest in, and maybe it was in the presentation slide a minute ago, but guidance of whether the Planning Commission was interested in changes in the Measure D scoring. And of course, that came up in the presentation as well. And I noticed that the language in the staff report used the term streamlined, which is related to, that word is it's a loaded word in the context of community development. I just wanted to get clarification about the context here of the use streamlined and whether it was really referring to the use of streamlined in the HCD sense or whether it was something different. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll questions that come to mind at this point, and then our staff can respond to the lot of them. Any further clarifying questions? Well, maybe staff wants to take a crack at those that are on our list.
Sure, I'm going to go ahead and try to orchestrate this a little bit. So Brittany's going to go first and answer the question about the tie.
Yes, thank you for that question. So we did have a tie at 98 points between an ADU project and a standalone single family residence. We did break the tie in the favor of the ADU, as we are advised by state law to prioritize ADUs. And the ADU project has construction-ready documents, which is consistent with City Council's direction from last year's Measure D process. And the standalone single family, we've been in contact with them. They are interested in changing their direction for their project and pursuing a September transfer.
I think, well, actually, I think I'll go ahead and go next and talk about the Housing Element Annual Progress Report, RENA, and then what we intended to be saying with the word streamlined, which I can appreciate is didn't quite land right. So we'll try to clarify that. With regards to the Housing Element Annual Progress Report, which you saw a couple weeks ago, clearly none of these applications for allocations were included in that report. These are pre-applications in that they don't have their Measure D allocations yet, so we don't have applications for coastal development permits or building permits if they're exempt from CDPs. So you will see them in future years, and for all the various milestones that you covered a couple weeks ago, when the application was submitted and approved for an entitlement, specifically a planning permit, when the application went in for building permit, and when certificate of occupancy was approved. Relative to the affordability levels of our regional housing needs allocation, otherwise referred to as RENA, ADUs have a role to play. We have been putting them in the moderate income category because we do not have a rent study completed yet. We are aware that quite a few of them are running at the low income category. As I mentioned, I think a couple weeks ago, our local San Mateo County 21 Elements group is preparing an ADU rent study. When that is complete, we will have backup documentation that is required by HCD to potentially reassign the affordability levels of ADUs that we have approved over the last few years that have been in their reports. We can edit our annual progress report if we have new information. So we're hopeful that a number of these ADUs, which Half Moon Bay has made a lot of progress on in terms of just quadrupling and then some our numbers year by year, that they could go into the low income category, which is one of the categories that we have had a hard time filling. So it's as I think Commissioner Benjamin mentioned, it was an area where we have a RENA deficit, so to speak. So there is a fit to that we're looking forward to, and we'll let you know what comes from that work. Now the streamlined, we've been working hard to score points at an excruciating level of detail, as you can see with this scoring system. What we really are looking for is a simpler system that is much more aligned with priorities about housing. City Council's priority in particular about the affordability of housing, and then some of the related needs around that, such as prioritizing units that would be fully accessible or would be at least fully visitable, which is a category of unit that is really important for kind of a more inclusive community. So there's a lot of things that are hinted at in our Measure D report, but right now, or excuse me, our Measure D scoring, but we're looking at flush entries and putting a grab bar in a shower. There's a lot more that can be considered on a more comprehensive level, but we don't need to be picking up points like this. We see some very straightforward ways to rate residential proposals for whether they're one unit or a whole multifamily development. And we're looking forward to showing you what we're coming up with through having run through these a couple of times now. The good thing about last year and then doing it again is you learn a lot by driving through, taking a test drive with your code and having to apply it. And having also recently finished our land use plan update, we really have a strong sense of how to make the Measure D ratings comply. So with your policy intent that came through that. So I wouldn't say streamlined so much as straightforward. Okay. And then Sarah gets to answer the PUD question. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I'll start though with Commissioner Hernandez's initial question about whether we were applying the code and the points allocated in the code, or whether we were sort of going beyond that. The code is what we have to follow, and that's built into the city's law, as well as it's been certified by the commission. But when you look at it, the language in some cases is not entirely clear for how we need to apply certain things. So a good example, I think, is it says that you can award up to 5 points for something called home size efficiency, but there's no indication of what home size was meant to be efficient. And what we've done here that I think provides a good deal of clarity to the public, a level of due process and a level of transparency, is that the commission provided very helpful feedback last year, and we were able to develop an implementation document that explained how we were going to score each of these categories that are provided in the ordinance. And that information was provided to each applicant before they applied. And so they were able to look at that and indicate, okay, home size efficiency, that means that the staff is looking at sizes of less than 1,000 square feet, or between 1,000 and 2,500 square feet. How am I going to design my project to fit into that and to reflect the points that are going to be allocated? And so that's what we've used. There's certainly refinements as we went through that process, but I feel like we've provided sufficient notice to the public about how we were going to do the implementation of an ordinance that in some ways is vague. And then the question about PUDs. So you asked, is it clear cut that we're allowing ADUs in the planned unit development districts? And for anyone that's been following this along, I know that there's been levels of public comment and concern around the development of ADUs in the planned unit development districts. So to start, just a little bit about where we are right now. The city has an ordinance that we adopted in 2018. That ordinance is no longer compliant with state law because we've had 2 legislative sessions now that have affected pretty massive changes in how ADUs need to be implemented by cities. And 2 of the key points in the new law are that for what we call non-streamlined ADUs, these are primarily attached ADUs or larger detached ADUs, the city is required to allow non-streamlined ADUs in areas zoned to allow single-family or multifamily use. And that's always been interpreted by HCD, by the city attorney's office, quite broadly. I should note that with appropriate city findings, the city could constrain those non-streamlined ADUs in jurisdictions throughout the city if it wanted to, based on public safety concerns or infrastructure concerns. But we would first need to go through the step of having an ordinance that makes those locational determinations supported by city findings. And we haven't done that for this round yet. For what we call streamlined ADUs, which are primarily these wholly within ADUs or ADUs that are less than 800 square feet and detached, and less than 16 feet in height, those must be allowed in what are called residential and mixed use zones. And this is really where we had some questions. Is a PUD district really considered a residential or mixed use zone? And our office has interpreted that broadly based on the statute and based on the legislative history to say yes. For the PUDs where there is residential development, those should be considered residential or mixed use zones. And in December of 2020, we received information from HCD through their technical guidance that they concurred basically in that assessment, and that this term should be construed broadly to mean any zone where residential use is allowed by right or through a conditional use permit. And again, that would apply then to PUD districts where residential use is currently allowed. As I said, right now we're in this process where we don't have a compliant ordinance in effect, where we're looking out to state law. So our recommendation at this point in time is to allow ADUs in these PUD districts. The City Council, when it considers the ADU ordinance later this year, could make findings to limit non-streamlined ADUs based on public safety or infrastructure constraints in the PUDs. It could also make potentially Coastal Act related findings related to streamlined ADUs. We just haven't done that yet. And so at this point in time, we're applying state law as been interpreted by the state agency that has authority to interpret this law. Also note that the Coastal Commission, the city had sent a letter to the Coastal Commission asking for it to weigh in on this particular issue, and the commission didn't respond to the city, and in issuing its technical guidance, indicated that the commission does not view itself as having the role or authority to issue interpretations of state housing law. So I don't believe we will be getting that. The one other thing I wanted to mention on ADUs in the planned unit development district and where we are at this point in time is that, as Jill said up top, we are not in an entitlement phase. We're looking broadly as to whether ADUs are generally allowed in these districts, whether there's a mechanism for these projects to meet zoning laws, but we still have to go through the CDP process. And it's certainly possible that once ADUs in the PUD districts go through the CDP process, that they might need to be modified, their location might need to be changed, or they could be not allowed at all. And I will note, so we talked about in the staff report the ADU proposed in Pacific Ridge, which is a PUD, but we also have an ADU proposed in the Matucci planned unit development district, which is also a PUD. So my apologies for highlighting one but not the other. Matucci has been in some ways less controversial because the Matucci specific plan has always contemplated that ADUs would be allowed, or second units would be allowed in that particular area. So I'm happy to talk further about this, but I hope that answers the general questions that we've had from the commission and the public about ADUs in these planned unit development districts.
Does that answer all of our?
Commissioner Gordon would like to speak.
So I do have a clarifying question. We can get to the PUDs is a longer discussion, but Jill brought up this idea that this kind of hope that ADUs would meet this sort of affordability criteria. I wanted to know if any ADUs have met that lower threshold yet of affordability. Have any ADUs hit that?
We are aware of several, but we're going to wait for the rent study, which is going to come with documentation through the 21 Elements group. We'll present it to you.
So some that might.
We already know of some. We've seen them rented, and we have been informed about them. But I'm going to defer to the rent study that's being done by the consultants for the San Mateo County group of we're a group of folks that work on our housing elements together. We've been doing this. This is the third cycle that we've done this. This is the cycle 6 housing element that we're embarking on, and I started doing this back on cycle 3 or 4 with them, and they have really good, deep housing law expertise as well as economics and
Okay.
yep. So we're going to bring you real data. Yep.
Well, just to be clear, so the ones that are on this list, the Measure D list right now, none of them meet that requirement, though, right? None of them hit that lower threshold, right?
We don't know. So let's be clear about the ones that
Okay.
are being proposed. So they're all coming in, other than the one proposed at Jenna Lane, as being presented as market rate, quote unquote. However, market rate for an accessory dwelling unit in Half Moon Bay, we are quite certain qualifies at least as a moderate income level, so lower than market rate. And some of them we are aware are renting at what is the low income level. Now, it surprises people, and one of the reasons why it's surprising is because the median household income in the county is so extraordinarily high that a pretty high rent can qualify for the low income status. And we weren't prepared to present this to you tonight, but we can come back when we're working on the housing element and share more about how that's working, as well as the data that we get from this rent study. So you know, go ahead.
I mean, it's clarifying questions. Still not clear to me, but maybe we can talk once we start the discussion. But I think we got to get to the people, right?
Through the chair, I want to follow up on something that I think I left.
Clarifying questions from.
Oh.
Certainly.
Chair
Please.
Reddick, I think maybe it would help the commission to that we clarify that other than Jenna Lane, none of these applications are getting points for making a commitment to having a deed restricted affordable unit. We only have one application that includes that. So they are scoring the points that they scored without that criteria. So this isn't something where we're presupposing that they would comply with that criteria, and we're not, nobody's getting points for that unless they're going to get a deed restriction. The Jenna Lane project without a deed restriction still was above the line, and we made sure that that was true in the event that that applicant changed their mind about a deed restriction. That's a big commitment. So that was important to us to not have something that was awarded an allocation and then based on that particular criteria and then wasn't able to follow through with it.
That makes sense. Thank you for clarifying that. If we have no more clarifying questions, I think we would move to public hearing for this item. Unless staff has anything further to add prior. All right, well, I'll open the public hearing at this point. And any of our attendees who are with us are welcome to signal your desire to speak by raising your virtual hand. And Bridget will make it possible for you to be heard.
I have one, Mike Ferrer would like to speak.
Welcome, Mr. Ferreira.
Oops. Go ahead and hit unmute again. I think it'll. I think we had a delay, Mike, so we can't hear you. You can unmute. There you go. Sorry about that. There you are.
Good evening, Chair Reddick, staff and commissioners. When the draft ordinance was taken to the council was emphatic that they did not want to include PUDs in the ordinance for ADUs. And the council asked for an opinion to be gotten from the Coastal Commission. The opinion that came back was muddled, but it was treated as an important issue at the council. Now I'm hearing that the HCD, predictably, has come in with its interpretation. And the problem here is I think staff did a lot of work on this, but when you're doing a whole lot of work, you don't necessarily get every step in always. And it would be my opinion or my observation that really the council needed to be told that what they wanted is not what they were going to get. And I think that they might well have wanted to have a discussion about the prioritization then of ADUs in PUDs. So I think there's something missing there, that should have happened, that I'm sure it wasn't deliberate, but the Planning Commission, my memory, doesn't make decisions for the council. That should have been a step for the council to opine and then have the Planning Commission work on it. I would have to say that in Pacific Ridge in particular, so it's kind of what we're talking about, we haven't done the stoplight yet. It's now, 16 years since the settlement agreement, and no dirt's being turned. And so it seems rather premature to be treating it as a finished PUD. That was an important mitigation. Some of you may remember all the turmoil around that as we pulled the number from 228 all the way down to 63. And the people who live on Terrace were still outraged, probably still are. And boy, would they be outraged to learn that it could be doubled over time. So I really do think that the council needs to have a chance to weigh in on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Any other members of the public desiring to speak on this item?
I see none. Oh, we have one. Cynthia Chinley.
Oh, hi, can you hear me?
Well,
There you are, yes.
welcome.
Yeah, sorry about that. I
Yes,
don't know how to
we
use
can.
Zoom so well on my cell phone. So I'm the homeowner for 111 Red Hawk Court in Pacific Ridge. And I guess my only understanding about the state law is that the cities cannot limit homeowners from having ADUs because we have a state housing crisis. So that's my only comment, is that the state legislature definitely wanted to have homeowners build ADUs to help alleviate the state housing crisis. And I don't know that it's a good idea or even legally valid for a city to limit a homeowner's right to have an ADU if we meet all the other requirements for setbacks, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you.
Thank you. Everyone who desires to is welcome to speak on this item.
No, I don't see anyone.
All right, well, last chance to speak. All right, I'll close the public hearing and invite deliberations.
Through the chair, before you jump into deliberation, we think it's really important to respond to some of the public comment and clarify, because there's more to the record than has come out, and it will help you have all of the information. And I think the deputy city attorney can cover most of it, and I'll back her up when she's done it. We have more.
Sure. So I just wanted to clarify what happened with the city council last year with respect to PUDs, our direction that we took from that, and then the subsequent steps. At the end of the city council meeting, where the city council was considering the draft ADU ordinance that the planning commission had approved, we received direction from the city council to seek guidance from the coastal commission as to whether accessory dwelling units would be required in planned unit development districts. There was not certainly no vote or other firm decision by the city council to state that PUD districts would be off limits for ADUs moving forward. We sought that coastal commission guidance. A letter went out to the coastal commission. Staff followed up with coastal commission staff, and we were told that the commission was unable to provide that sort of specific level guidance to the cities. So I want to be clear that the coastal commission did not provide guidance on this particular topic. Instead, they were said that at the end of the day, it's not within their jurisdiction to interpret or apply state housing laws. And instead, what we got was very definitive guidance from HCD, and I wanted to remind folks that HCD is the agency that does have authority over these state housing laws. The city will be required not only to submit any ADU ordinance to the commission for certification, but also to HCD for review and comment. So we're walking a very tight line here, trying to comply with state housing law while continuing to protect Coastal Act resources, and we believe that the guidance we've been providing does that. So I wanted to make those clarifications.
Then, go ahead.
I also just wanted to add that we have been keeping the city council up to date and apprised of these circumstances, and so they're aware. It has not been brought back for a hearing yet, although we are moving towards that, but the city council has been aware of these issues.
We have a couple more notes on this, just to give feedback of the city's application for the terrace signalization project is in the Caltrans shop, and it's almost complete, and it's a funded project, and our city engineer is looking forward to, I believe, a 2022 project schedule, and noting that Highway 1 South is already underway. Those were two projects that were approved for coastal development permits through the Planning Commission with CEQA review for each, and we just they're moving along. So I know there was concern that wasn't completed, and yes, it's been a while, but it's underway. Sarah, there's one more thing I think it's important to note on and we can come back to it later. Maybe we give the commission this is their turn to deliberate, but I do think if they get into discussion and any concern about the process for reviewing a coastal development permit for an ADU in a PD, we thought that might come up, and we're prepared to answer that. It hasn't come up yet, but it's an interesting topic. So we will stop.
Thank you, Sarah and Jill and Brittany, for all the good work and clear presentations tonight. We'll turn to commission delivery.
Commissioner Reddick, you're cutting out a bit. There you are.
Yeah, I think maybe we all are. I'm having a little trouble with everyone's audio, but I'll try to speak right into the mic. Would any commissioners like to begin our deliberations?
Commissioner Hernandez.
Commissioner Hernandez.
So overall, I'm impressed with the thoroughness and the work that's gone into this. For the folks listening at home, the state has made changes to housing law. The City Council and Planning Commission have established clear guidelines on what our priorities are. And a great deal of effort has been put into place to make sure that the rules of the road were clear to applicants. ADUs are important, and we have legal requirements, the state code, to support them. Our council has prioritized higher density housing in the city and near downtown, which conforms with Measure D. We also have heard many, many times from city council members that it's a priority to get below market rate housing in the city. So when I look at the process overall, the criteria that were shared with applicants, it's pretty clear to me that we followed due process. Everybody knew what the rules were. When I went through this process in 2005, we took great care to make sure that our project scored the maximum number of points, even submitting our project one day later than our friend Sarah Polgar, so that we would score an extra couple of points. That was a joke. We didn't do that on purpose, but it's actually what happened. But we really appreciate the process that's gone through here. I'm still a little dubious about the whole ADUs for, are they applicable for PDUs? But I do appreciate that question has been looked at thoroughly. I'm sure City Council would love to dig into that a little bit more, but it's outside of my jurisdiction. So I just have to say that I think that, you've done a good job making sure that we're not taking away people's property rights and we're clear cut. Everybody had the same rules. Everybody understood what the criteria were. They were applied equally and consistently. And so I'm supportive of this project. I will say the one thing that's kind of ironic about all of this is the priority of the state legislature was to create more housing units. And in this instance, there are many ADUs that have jumped in front of full houses. So you end up with fewer net housing units as a result of it. But really, it's more because the ADUs were better projects based on the criteria. So I think as people look to this process in the future, it's important to remember that a good project is more important than more housing. And the ADUs score. So if you want to have below market housing, look at number 8 Jenna Lane. They maxed out their points by incorporating things into the process, which have been, again, clearly communicated as priorities. So I think this is a good example of where policy actually has a direct impact on what we're doing from a housing perspective, from the housing crisis perspective. So again, I'm very supportive of where we're at right now.
Thank you, Commissioner Hernandez. Very well said. Who else desires to comment? Commissioner Gorn, please.
Oh, hey. So I have an issue with having ADUs in PUDs. Now, if you let go of the acronyms for a second, PUD is planned development, planned urban development. That means it's planned. So that goes through many iterations of planning, including staff and planning commission, city council and coastal commission. And everyone in that neighborhood knows those are 62 units. And that's what everyone's agreeing on, is those 62 units. And to say that you can now have 124 units or 100 units or 80 units or whatever it is because you want the ADUs in there isn't like, if I'm a neighbor there, I'm not liking it. The neighbors probably didn't even agree to 62, but that's the agreement. That's what everyone decided when they went through the whole planning process. That's why you have the planning process. So to turn around and say, okay, and they can build an additional, 10, 20, 30, 40, 62 units is not, maybe you could do that legally. You could find a little legal avenue to do that, but I don't think that's right, first of all. Secondly, I don't think it's our call as planning commission. Like, that's an issue for the city council to talk about. And I remember the city council talking about that before. And yes, they did say they wanted coastal commission guidance, but really that was just a way of punting to say, hey, if the coastal commission will decide it for us, then we don't have to say it out loud. But they want to have say. I can tell you right now, they made their opinions pretty clear at the time. And I think it's for them to talk about and decide, which means to me, at the very least, like if I'm ruling the world, which of course I'm not, but I'm at least punting to city council on this. But if that's not an issue, if that's not a possibility, then there's no way I think that sort of, like, personally, I just don't think that's right. So there's a discussion topic.
Thank you, Commissioner Gorn. Commissioner Benjamin.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for, I appreciate both Commissioner Hernandez and Commissioner Gorn's point. I have a related take, I guess, to both of them. But my thinking is less toward the actual scores that took place and more toward our process, and seeing this in the context of other decisions that we as a planning commission make. For the most part, we are, establishing the record for things that go to appeal, or in the worst case, into court. And I certainly think it's important for us to be very conscious of the way that we are thinking about this, with an eye to those things. One of the advantages that the city council has that we do not, when they're considering issues that are have the potential to expose the city to some legal risks, is that they can have closed sessions where they can really think hard about what the ramifications are of decisions. And we cannot. We are not permitted, as I understand it, to have closed sessions. We can certainly get legal advice, even confidential legal advice, but that's different from having a dialogue the way the city council can. I feel like this is one of those topics where they ought to have a chance to do that. And I understand that we are where we are. I do not view this as a some kind of indictment. In some ways, it is a byproduct of a way we thought about the way we were going to grow back when Measure D was passed. And we're sort of playing the hand that we're dealt that way. I appreciate that we've had comments with respect to the two state agencies that seem to be most heavily involved in planning decisions concerning housing in Half Moon Bay, which of course is the Housing and Community Development Agency on one hand, and the Coastal Commission Agency on the other. And I think if the city attorney were to be asked, do we think those agencies are in alignment? Do they have a clear view of each other's thinking? And is there daylight between them? The existential answer might be yes, because the Coastal Commission is carefully skirting a claim that they are in charge of telling HCD how to do their thing. And HCD would say yes, because they're being careful to say, we're not going to tell the Coastal Commission how to do their thing. But that's a very existential definition of what it means to be a lockstep. If we take that existential definition and we turn it into constructive insight, concrete insight, what we have are two organizations that in the 30 odd years or almost 30 years that I've been involved in Half Moon Bay politics, have engaged in a very polite shoving match with each other. That's not speaking ill of them. Public agencies do that all the time. The city and the county of San Mateo do that. Districts like SAM and CCWD do that. This is just not an uncommon arrangement because there are tensions between the missions of these agencies. It is an inherent property of the way we think about doing business. And I think that my goal in thinking about this is to make sure that Half Moon Bay doesn't get crushed between these two giant agencies. I don't want, there's that Greek, is it Ulysses who has to navigate the ship between the two islands that are crashing into each other? I want to be sure Half Moon Bay isn't that, and that we have really taken clarity in the way we think about that. I don't doubt that staff has thought hard about this, but as planning commissioners, we usually live within the confines of the zoning ordinance and the local coastal program, or more generally, the general plan and the municipal code. And what we are thinking about here is the context of state law that could be perceived, as one of the speakers from the public said tonight, has obviated in their perspective a section of code. And we have HCD saying, well, not really. It hasn't really obviated. We have the Coastal Commission being terse in its comments. So I'm puzzled. Obviously, we want to do the right thing. We want to respect property rights. But I do think that we should be very cautious in keeping the record for this item clear enough for the city council, if they should happen to hear this item on appeal, to have broad room to lay out their own thinking and not have them coerced into a record that they may not agree with from a subordinate agency, namely us, the Planning Commission. So I have some caution there. I do appreciate what former Mayor Ferreira mentioned about the city's preferences with respect to ADUs, as reinforced by Commissioner Gorn. And I appreciate what our city attorney pointed out in the constructive language in the guideline that shifted us from residentially zoned to areas that permit residential. I think the language was about single and multifamily, but the key concept was that shift. So I do think that there's writing on the wall there that I am paying attention to. That's not the same as liking it. At the same time, I do feel that our potential to recognize issues like the impact it has on coastal access, the potential damage to coastal resources, that would mean not just issues, but visual resources, is worth considering. And I think there's room for us to do that. I am deeply concerned about the potential for a degradation of the agreements that we have made with developers with respect to the size and number of units that are going to be developed. In some ways, this is an illustration of this unfamiliar role that we're in tonight, where we're not playing within the sphere of Half Moon Bay. We're operating in the sphere of state law, an area where staff may be very facile, but as a planning commission, that's a novel area for us. We don't normally live there. And that, to be honest, that makes me uncomfortable. I noticed that there is a new bill in this legislative session, I think it's 721, that has the potential to undo additional covenants and restrictions. And they may not be applicable in this particular case, but they call into question the ability to maintain the commitments that developers and the public have, even deed restricted ones. And that's a pretty significant change in the way of thinking about how development would take place. That's, I would venture to say, that's even draconian. Obviously, it's not law yet. But just as in the past legislative session where we talked about doubling the number, the possibility that each single family residence could be subdivided as a ministerial action, I think we have to take a very hard look, swallow, and understand that the process of trying to produce housing for the state in general produces some pretty uncomfortable fits for an area like Half Moon Bay. I'm sure every community feels that way when they look at this, but I got to tell you, I really feel it here. And I want our policy guides, which is the city council, not us, to have a chance to make that call. The staff report also suggested that we might want to pay attention to our scoring criteria for Measure D, to which I will say definitely. And I appreciate the clarification that streamlined was didn't refer to the notion of streamlined in the housing law. So thank you for that. I do think that a better point system and an ADU ordinance that lets us bring our status as a entirely contained within the coastal zone is urgent and getting more urgent as I see new bills coming forward. So I'm hopeful that that will happen. The reason I asked the question about RENA allocations and where these might fit in was not because I think I know the answer. I defer to the study that staff mentioned and the experience of other commissioners and the public on that. But it's because, as I understand the requirements laid out by the Housing and Community Development, if we produce more housing in a particular bucket, let's say below, low income, if we produce more than we need for a particular cycle, maybe we needed 40 and we produce 50, we do not get to roll over those 10 units into the next housing cycle. They just say, attaboy, you still got to produce however many you got to produce next time. And it doesn't matter that you did more the last time. That creates a sad, perverse, but real incentive for us to be careful in the way we score applications that will eventually fall into these different buckets, so that we are not constrained to, driven by our housing element to produce efforts that overachieve with respect to housing goals that are laid out in our RENA allocations, and underachieve with respect to other city goals that we have that are not directly related to housing. And I think our point system could probably help us with that if we updated it. There are certainly other things that seem more pertinent in our, if we were to update our scoring criteria, a house that didn't have to take an optional decrease in setback in proximity to a wetland or a stream, that didn't, well, I could probably illustrate, but I don't want to get too far off the point. The key is that I agree wholeheartedly that we need a different point system that reflects the more modern perspective of what we want in housing. And the city council has articulated very clearly that they wanted inside the downtown core. That doesn't mean that we are trying to undo Measure D. I know there's that section for what can be produced outside. I acknowledge that. I'm also very concerned about what's going to happen when our existing undeveloped PUDs without a specific plan get a specific plan. We spent some time in the LCP update to anticipate the potential for ADUs. But if there are potential other bills coming down the pipe, such as the splitting of lots or other changes, I want to be sure that we have understood what our infrastructure capacities are with respect to, sewage flows, transportation, water, you name it. And in the downtown area, when we approve the conversion of projects that didn't have a housing component to one that does, like in the CDR area, it seems like these rules make it really hard for them to have the flexibility to turn back, because we're constrained for producing, if I understand it correctly, a new residence where that one was converted back to commercial at some point. What I'm trying to say with all of these little details, pulling back, is that staff understands the ramifications far better than we do, and the legal ramifications with respect to what will pass muster if things get testy for us in the future, make me nervous. And so I am not trying to, in expressing these concerns, I'm not trying to preserve some ancient view of what Half Moon Bay looked like, or what any particular subdivision does or should look like. But I do think that a decision on this that seems unanimous and says it's great might communicate the wrong message if something is appealed with respect to how we thought about it. And if there were a way, if we need to make a decision, if there are ways that we can avoid having this framed as being precedential, because we are working in a space where the state housing law is changing and the demands for housing in our area is changing, and the stability of our environment is changing, and the demand for access to the coast is increasing. I want to be sure that we have maximized our flexibility to react to the world that we are going to be developing a revised criteria for development. The game will not be the same game the next time, I hope. Thanks for listening. I'll sit back and let my colleagues comment before I come back if I have any other thoughts. You've been very patient.
Thank you, Commissioner Benjamin. Your comments are thoughtful as always. Any other comments? Vice Chair Polgar, you have your hand up, I think.
Yes, and I hopefully folks can hear me. I'm having a lot of trouble. Everything's coming through very choppy, so I may have missed some of what was said, but I wanted to echo Commissioner Hernandez's appreciation for the work that staff did in developing the criteria and in clarifying those and making them very transparent and having a very clear and identifying the key things that are really appropriately applied in context, because this is a however many decades old set of criteria. So I really did appreciate that. And I thought that was well done in this context. So I have, it's funny, I have mixed thoughts about I've definitely hear what my fellow commissioners have said with respect to, for instance, the issue of approving the ADUs in PUDs, excuse me. And I mean, I will say my perspective coming in, or especially after listening to the Sarah Clark explain, you know, the legal basis. My understanding is that, I mean, without our own ADU, or excuse me, ADU ordinance in place, I don't necessarily know that we do have a lot of leeway. Was my understanding. I'm not as concerned necessarily about the context of how understanding how the state law applies here, and being able to interpret that for this decision. I do think, though, I very much agree with Commissioner Benjamin on this needing the opportunity to have discussion at the city council level. In that, for instance, I think, they expressed this concern about having ADUs approved in PUDs, and then, but I think that it bears, further discussion at that level, because I will also say there's a lot of nuance to me in that, because if you're frankly, the landscape is changing in terms of the housing requirements with these new regulations or laws. It's changing across the board, so everybody's gonna have to is gonna be taken on some additional development in terms of ADUs. And it's an interesting concept. If I very much, like, I mean, obviously with the local coastal program, very much in favor, obviously, of a very planned, intentional, well understood and planned for the scale of what's appropriate in an area for a PUD, excuse me. But frankly, if there's a blanket statement of no ADUs and PUDs, then that puts the burden, in a sense, on other areas of the city. And so we're talking about not wanting, we've had a set amount of that was in mind, for instance, for a PUD. It was a set, agreed upon amount. Well, at some point that area, we've had the cases, now where areas that have been fully developed PUDs, and so they're no longer treated as such in our planning going forward. So they're now open to under our kind of current discussion, or like one interpretation, that yeah, sure, let's go ahead with the ADUs. So I guess my point is that there may be a little bit, I see more nuance to it maybe than just PUDs versus not. And I also see that it's a question of maybe, yeah, you may not want more in PUDs, but maybe just squeezing it all into other areas isn't necessarily the best option either. So I see a need for a more a further discussion. I agree that I see a definite benefit of the city council taking that up and having that opportunity to explore that. I have a question, though, based on some of this conversation. My understanding is that our role here tonight is to consider the list as a whole. And so we don't necessarily get to pick and choose that, because there are two that happen to be within a PUD, those are kind of pulled out for further consideration by the city council, whereas the rest would move forward. My understanding was it was all or none. And so I do want to understand that and what the ramifications are for kind of the whole list when we're having this discussion about a particular subset of that really has no bearing, actually. If we're focused on the PUD question, really it has no bearing. And I will say that, while I want to see the discussion happen at the city council, about this, I frankly do see that under the current situation, which is that state law applies, we don't have an ADU ordinance that would clarify this. We don't, and I think Commissioner Benjamin raised excellent points about this kind of, we're in this little could, oh, I don't want to say it crunched, but I do see that we, right now, the language about is pretty clear to me at the state, just under the state law that we don't really have a say in that. So I guess I'm just wondering what the opportunity is to how this works if we are considering that the city council would really need to take this up.
Well, I'll ask Jill to confirm if I have this right, but my impression is that the commission is asked to ratify or not ratify the rankings that have been presented. The other discussion I think is useful for the future direction in which we take our work on refining and evolving the rankings. But Jill, do you have anything to add to that?
Staff would like to respond to a number of these things, and I think it could be helpful. We don't think this is an all or nothing item, and that the list as a whole does not have to be ratified as it's been presented to you. In fact, the code cites that the Planning Commission may ratify or modify the final determination of points in residential dwelling unit allocations at this public meeting. So we would like, when you're done discussing, we've been actively taking notes and preparing ourselves to give you some more information and some options. We're hearing that you have a number of potential paths that you want to explore, and we want to be supportive to you for whichever one you decide to go on.
All right, thank you for that. Commissioner Hernandez, were you raising your hand?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that I was having the same, as we've been talking through this process, I was having the same thought that Sarah did. One, is it permissible for us to edit the list? Jill's answered that question affirmatively. The second point was, if, I guess I'll ask the question a little more finely, right? We've got 22 units that are being recommended for approval. I think 20 are pretty clear cut that they should be approved. I mean, I don't think there's any, what I've heard so far is there's no dissent amongst my commissioners that there's full support for 20. There's a question about 2 of them. Is it permissible for us to say, yeah, we approve the 20 and, these 2, we think we should just punt to city council for final interpretation? Is that an acceptable decision, or do we have to say these are the ones we're picking, move on? I mean, help me understand what we're allowed to do here. And my concern, Sarah, is if we determine at a future date as a city that we don't want ADUs and PUDs because it doesn't conform with a specific plan, settlements that have been made, and of course, assuming everything is, has gone through an appropriate legal process where we think it's appropriate, are we setting a precedent here that undermines future policy? I see a head shaking from Sarah, so
We're eager to answer all these questions, but we want to make sure that you finish discussing. I do need to ask flip this around. Staff has a clarifying question through the chair for Commissioner Hernandez. You noted that there were 2 that you were wondering about, and I'm assuming that they are the 2 that are ADUs and PUDs. But if that's not correct, please let me know, because we need to clarify something.
That's correct.
Okay,
that's correct.
So let's clarify for the group that the city has 2 planned unit developments that have PUD plans that specifically allow ADUs. And Matucci PUD is one of them, and the Stolowski Gonzalez PUD is the other one. So the case of the Jenna Lane project doesn't have the same kind of standing as the other ones. So we just wanted you to know that. I think that might be helpful. And then let's see what else you have. And we're going to need a break when you're ready to let us do that.
So just to confirm then, really, Matucci already allows ADUs within the PUD in the specific plan that's clear cut. So really, there's only one gray area here, which is the one that's in Pacific Ridge. So okay, that would be my understanding then of where my commissioners sit. But I would love to hear if there's any other comments or feedbacks, or if I've misinterpreted the general sentiment here.
Commissioner Benjamin.
Yeah, thank you. Responding to Rick's request for clarification. We've had our conversation about ADUs and the PUDs, and in my own sort of layman's way of thinking about it, I've tried to incorporate the insights from the city attorney's office that we heard tonight. And so while I have some reservations about it, I also heard it. My concern was more, is the city council going to have a chance to express its feelings about this? And the answer appears to be only if something is appealed, so I don't know. With respect to the other units, the other 21 that are being discussed, the only one that I really raised my eyebrows at was the one at the top of the list. And I mentioned this in passing in a conversation, because I understand that it was done with full awareness and compliance with the point system, but it feels like a twofer, if you follow my thinking. Both of the projects got the benefit of all of the points for both projects, as opposed to other projects, maybe an ADU for an existing home that, had to sort of live with just the credit for it being an ADU. I did not, since we had public comment on the question, I want to emphasize that I think ADUs are properly included in the Measure D conversation. That was about growth and impacts related to growth. So I didn't feel, respectfully, I didn't agree that somehow they didn't belong in the list. And to be fair, ADUs do represent an opportunity to cluster growth relative to new development. So I see a lot of reasons why it is entirely appropriate to incorporate them into thinking. But that one, with both of them getting credit for both units, sort of stuck in my craw as it went down. It looks to me like it's consistent with the way the scoring was set up. I think they had envisioned, wholly multifamily kind of I don't know, maybe they didn't. I think ADUs were kind of a novelty when these rules were set up, and we really didn't know how it was going to evolve. So we can sit here and shrug our shoulders with 2020 hindsight, but what makes more sense is for us to look forward and say, are these the right criteria for scoring things in the future? Maybe we should be looking at how good they are at fire safety, how much power they draw, and the other things I had mentioned in my earlier comments. So other than that one, Rick, I did not have any other immediate reservations. My reservations were more related to process. Thank you.
Commissioner Gorn.
So I don't have a strong opinion about this one. I just think that if the Matucci property is an ADU and a PUD, that is something that the city council, if we're leaving that decision up to the city council, we kind of have to leave that one off the list, even if it is included in its approval. I'm not sure about that, so it sounds like that is the case. So I'm asking more than stating.
through the chair.
Commissioner Benjamin.
Thanks. So Dave, I think that the way the city council gets to weigh in on this is if someone appeals it to them. Ours is final unless that happens. Going forward, and I suppose that they could take an appeal on their own. I don't know if the rules for a couple of council members being able to bring something up for discussion applies in this case or not. It's been a while since I've looked at that arcane piece of the appeal language, but we're kind of the way it's set up right now, as I understand it.
Well,
Staff may
except we're in for, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. So we're in for a certain number of these, because we're talking about taking a couple out for city council approval. So we're talking about 20 out of 22, or maybe 21 out of 22. And that's my question. Are we talking about 20 out of 22 or 21 out of 22? I'm not sure. So that was my question. If we are.
Sorry, I understood the question, Dave.
Okay.
Jill, you'd like to give us some insight?
We can answer quite a few of these questions as we go, but we're, as we mentioned, we are trying to review all the different paths that you have put forth in your discussion, and there's certainly the topic of bringing the matter to city council, and we would really like an opportunity to discuss that with the city attorney. So yes, you're it, but maybe you're not. So give us a chance to catch up on that. I do want to be real clear though about Matucci. There are already ADUs in that PUD. Many of the homes, many of the sites already have ADUs, and that PUD specifically allows them. So we'd be concerned about changing the status of how that's reviewed to be similar to a PUD where the ADUs are not as well defined in whatever their enabling language is. So that one's it's really different.
That's clear.
Okay, good. All right.
Good.
Is there anything else big on your mind so that we can go have a chat?
Through the chair.
Yeah, Commissioner Benjamin.
Yeah, I think I know the answer, but just to get clarification, when we talk about ADUs in Matucci, we are not talking about the guest houses, right? I remember when that was approved. The lots were approved with an ability to build a home and the ability to build it was called a guest house, I believe, in the original language. Those are not the ADUs to which you refer. Is that correct?
I believe the Matucci PUD plan makes a reference to second units, which is what our zoning code called ADUs back in the day. So I understand the guest houses had a different definition and there were different thoughts about what those were. It becomes a little bit confusing, but in this case, second units are acknowledged, and it's been done multiple times.
Yeah, I certainly defer to your understanding of what that code says. It's been decades since I saw it. Thank you.
Well, my personal views on these things are very much in support of what a lot of my colleagues have said. I think the staff has worked hard and has brought to bear a rational and transparent process to this. And given what we have heard from the city attorney tonight, I would be reluctant to engage in line item veto of the list of Measure D awards. But if as we've been discussing, if there is a way for city council to weigh in and make policy, which is their charter regarding ADUs and PUDs, I'd certainly be open-minded to that. I think as we all agree that there is important work to be done soon on the rankings system to assure that it is even more strongly in support of what the city council's set policies and priorities are for development downtown, for affordable housing and such. And I would just add that that's something that when we undertake it, we'll want to do it quickly, because the longer that system is in limbo, the tougher it is for current and future applicants. Commissioner Benjamin again. Well, your hand wasn't
I'm
up.
sorry, my hand was still up prior. Yeah, I just forgot to unraise it. My bad.
No worries.
Thank you.
Rick, did you have your hand up? All right, well, with that, Jill, we'll turn it over to what staff would like to do for next steps.
Staff would like 10 minutes to discuss so that we can give you a lot more clarity about some of the options. And we also want to answer a few of the questions that are kind of still on the table that we think would be to the benefit of the commission, as well as council, the record, and our applicants who are still hanging on and participating in this. So if that is acceptable to the chair, I want to see if our deputy city attorney agrees that I think we can cover this pretty quickly and be back to you in about 10 minutes.
Great, that makes sense. Well, let's reconvene at 9:50, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioners, for allowing us that time. We are prepared to respond to an array of topics that have come up, and then present a recommendation for going forward tonight based on what we think you want to do. And of course, if we've gotten it wrong, you'll let us know and we'll make adjustments. I'm going to start by talking about the housing element and the relevance of this to the Planning Commission's work. Then Brittany's going to kind of do the soup to nuts of a range of other topics. Sarah will address the ordinances that the work that's coming down the line, as well as some specifics regarding Pacific Ridge, and then I will talk about a potential action for you to consider, so a revised staff recommendation. So it came up about the Planning Commission's purview relative to this item and policy, and we do want to recognize that this is completely seated within housing element policy and reducing the barriers to the development of affordable housing. So you do have some definite connection to this work. RENA, in terms of rollovers from cycle to cycle, that is correct. We want to be clear that that's right. If you overperform in a reading category, you don't get credit for those units in the next cycle. Now, that said, if you overperform in a lower income category and you're underperforming in a higher income category, you can actually get credit for those lower income units within that same cycle. So there is not a risk that we're going to blow our arena out of the water in cycle 5, which is the one that we're in. And we want to be clear that any unit that gets built at one of those any of the lower categories is going to matter in somehow, one way or the other. You're going to get credit for it as having produced, which is really important. And then, yes, it is absolutely true that City Council, as well as the Planning Commission, through your land use plan work, have prioritized development in, well, what we had was a very well-defined town center area. One of the thoughts for an updated Measure D ranking system is to acknowledge that town center boundary. As you know, Commission, the downtown boundary is an old redevelopment boundary, and we have to use it because it was part of the ballot measure. However, we can also use the town center boundary and have some weighting applied to sites that are within the town center but not in the downtown. So that's one of the, shall I say, straightforward approaches that we wanted to apply to the benefit of a particular site over another. You can see there are a lot of categories that are evaluating sites in this checklist, and they're really nitpicky, and just being in the town center should be very significant, we think, from a policy perspective, having aligned the entire land use plan to that structure. That takes, well, and also we need to notice, and we're frustrated by this too, that we do not have any applications in the downtown at this point this year. Last year we did, and we're processing applications for some mixed use projects downtown, and you've seen some already, and you're going to see more. At this point, none of these proposed allocations are going to block pending development in the downtown that we're aware of. That said, we are also looking at how the rating system can be adjusted to make sure that we maintain capacity in the event that something really significant were to come through the pipeline, such as an affordable housing project downtown, where we want to make sure that there's capacity for it. So that's also on our list. That covers the housing element topic, and so I'll move to Brittany.
Thank you. So I'll start with answering the question about multiple units being scored together in a single application. This is how the ordinance is set up. The ordinance certainly didn't think about all of the issues with how ADUs would be scored specifically, separately, but a lot of the work that staff and the Planning Commission did last year on the Measure D process really fleshed out how those ADU only projects might score differently on certain criteria. We also know that there are other applications that included a single family and an ADU that scored either close to or below the thresholds. And that without the BMR points, the Jenna Lane project would have scored more in the middle of the bunch, but still above the line. On the topic of ESHA, we absolutely understand and hear the concern about our continued need to protect ESHA under the Coastal Act. We would just like to assure the Commission that approval of these Measure D certificates does not in any way reduce or interfere with the CDP review process and our Coastal Act obligations. The CDP process is where we really walk that fine line that Sarah was referring to about harmonizing our LCP requirements with the housing element. And my last note, just a reminder, we did model a significant number of ADUs in the land use plan update, and note that the water demand and sewer capacity are included in those models. So we have looked at this, and it absolutely should be tracked going forward, but it has been modeled and considered in your build out.
And thanks, Brittany. Sarah, I think you get some time now.
Sure. Thank you. So I wanted to just touch on a few different issues that came up. First, related to the concern that was raised about the fact that the Pacific Ridge area, the parties had agreed both in a settlement agreement and in the implementing documents that there would be 63 homes here. And I wanted to clarify that the way the Measure D system interacts with the rest of the city's planning code will ensure that that issue is addressed appropriately. And this is building a little bit off what Brittany just said, but Measure D is the first step in the process. Applicants come to us with proposed projects, and we score them based on preliminary plans as outlined in the ordinance. But that does not create an entitlement, that does not create a guarantee. And very specifically in the Pacific Ridge area, we have an existing coastal development permit that was the result of litigation and the settlement agreement. We are in the process of needing to review that. Should a Measure D allocation be awarded for this applicant, it would move then to the next step of looking at whether the proposed ADU is compliant with the existing CDP, whether whether changes are necessary. And because of the way that the CDP was developed, it's very possible that we would need to CDP modification that could be processed not only by the city, but may in fact need commission approval. So this is not by any means an automatic guarantee that the 111 Red Hawk Court project would be finally approved by the city. It would need to go through multiple layers of additional process intended to address the very issues around, the fact that this is a planned development where we were balancing appropriate concerns. And so I just wanted to make that clarification clear. And that's certainly true for any ADU. Part of the process that we have in place and will continue to be in place is that if there's an existing CDP for a project, the applicants need to show that they're either in compliance with the CDP or to seek appropriate modification of the CDP moving forward. They're not just automatically granted the administrative CDP that we can use on other types of projects. And then I wanted to address the concern about the potential precedential nature of allowing a Measure D allocation for the project in Pacific Ridge. And what I want to highlight here is that staff is committed to bringing a revised ADU ordinance back to City Council in short order. It's been on a to-do list for some time, and we are getting to it. And that is the appropriate vehicle to really vet the Planning Commission's policy questions that were raised tonight around the appropriate use of accessory dwelling units in planned unit developments, what potential findings could be made by the city. And so that's where we anticipated having these more fulsome discussions, and that will be happening in short order. We recognize the timing consideration that we have a statute that requires us to, or a city code that requires us to do the Measure D certificates at this point in time, and that hasn't been done yet, but that is coming. And so I wanted to make sure that the commission was aware of that. And I think that's all I wanted to cover for right now.
Thanks, Sarah. All right, so where do you go tonight to serve your role in ratifying the Measure D scoring and helping our applicants move on? What we heard is that you are concerned about 111 Red Hawk Court, and that you want to make sure that City Council has a chance to consider that one. If that continues to be true following what Sarah just described is, there's quite a row to hoe for that applicant to get a CDP. But if you're really concerned about the allocation, then we have a suggestion for how you could move forward. We're assuming that you are comfortable with the rest of the list and the scoring. So we're talking about suggesting that the commission move forward to ratify 21 out of the 22, pulling out Red Hawk and denying it, and then having Granelli, which was tied with the last in line, as a backup allocation, dependent on what City Council does relative to Red Hawk. Now, this is assuming that there will be an appeal of your denial of Red Hawk, and we will work with the applicant to help them do that. We think that's fair and appropriate under these circumstances. And so we will try to help them get that stage. And if there's another way to bring it to council, we'll figure that out. We'll get our way there. But we want to do it all very quickly. There's a need to have this work done that you're doing tonight, at least by your first April meeting. That's why we're at your second March meeting. We're trying to do better than the code and also have a buffer in case something happens like this happened. So that is our suggestion for you to ponder. And if you have questions about it, let us know. And thanks for giving us a break. We needed a little time.
Thank you for that. I think Commissioner Hernandez may have a question for you, Jill.
Is there a cost for filing an appeal?
Appeals are free if they are in the Coastal Commission appeals jurisdiction. Many parts of Pacific Ridge certainly are, and so we already discussed this and see this as a no charge appeal.
Okay, great.
I think it's very important. Yeah.
No, I think that's good. I have no further questions. I don't know if anybody has any clarifying questions of city staff at this point.
Commissioner Benjamin.
Thank you. Can you remind me if the city council has the purview, if it seems to me that any two members of the city council might be able to bring this item in front of the city. Is that still operable?
I can raise, or I can answer that, which is that any one member of the city council could appeal the commission's determination here. So it's not required to be two. I think what you're thinking of is not an appeal process, but a review process, which would be a more cumbersome way of getting where we wanted to go.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Through the chair, can you just clarify that point? Maybe I blanked out for a second, but I didn't quite understand what the last. So you said that one city council member can appeal the planning commission decision. Is that what okay?
Yes, that's correct. That any one member of city council could file an appeal. They don't have to have been present or make comments tonight.
Is there further deliberation by commissioners in light of what we've heard from staff now?
So I, through the chair.
Yes, Commissioner Hernandez.
In 0.1 miles, turn right.
Sorry, turn off my phone here. I think there's two choices in front of us. Choice one is ratify the 22 projects as laid out in the original item. And if a city council member wishes to review an item, then they could review a single item And so I think that that's one option. Option two is to just go ahead and say we approve the 21, leave the 22nd, and let the applicant go through the appeals process. I'm supportive of both approaches. I think the second approach is a little finer because it also creates the option to bring Grinnelli forward if the Red Hawk project is ultimately not approved. And so I'm somewhat more supportive of number two versus number one.
Yeah, I follow your logic there.
Through the chair, can I clarify? And perhaps
Please do, Sarah. Please do.
My understanding is that if one of the applicants drops out, Jill, you would move down to next on the list. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was the next on the list is the Grinnelli project.
So all is to say is that either way, I think Grinnelli, if Red Hawk doesn't move forward for whatever reason, Grinnelli wouldn't be next in line.
Sorry, through the chair, just to clarify one more thing. So I heard Commissioner Hernandez commenting that his interpretation was that if this went, a city council member requested or appealed this, and then they would only be appealing the 111 Red Hawk, or are they appealing, is it the entire list?
So they would be appealing the entire planning commission decision, but presumably the focus of the decision would be on 111 Red Hawk Court. That's what the discussion would be about. The remainder of the allocations would potentially be in limbo while we hear that appeal, but that's whether someone would actually have whether the city council would hear the remainder of those would get to be seen. Sorry if that wasn't clear.
So if I could just build on that point, there's two options. Option number two removes the other 21 applicants from being potentially in limbo. Okay, so then I'm definitely more in favor of number two because it removes doubt for 21 out of 22 applicants.
Me as well.
Is the timing of the process with city council in either of those two scenarios, would it meet what you need to get done by the deadline?
I think so. We're going to do our best to get to the earliest April meeting we possibly can. Their meetings are April 6th and April 20th. We'll have a bit to do, but we don't want to leave them in limbo either. But we are very concerned about the 21 also who have fulfilled all the obligations of this process and have been patiently waiting.
Yes. Jill and Sarah, do you see any other pros or cons to these two scenarios that maybe we haven't discussed yet? I suppose one small risk is that city council, nobody chooses on city council to appeal it.
Well, if there's no timely appeal by anyone, if you deny it and there's no timely appeal, then we know that the outcome will be that Grinnelli would move up and the applicant at Red Hawk would have some options for going forward at a future time. If you were to ratify them all and there was no timely appeal, then that would be the outcome would conclude with you.
Commissioner Benjamin.
Thank you. Just so I am don't distinguish between either of those options. I'm happy to hear either motion. The staff report also asked for direction with respect to moving forward on revising the scoring system. I think the commentary was pretty clear, but did you need anything in a motion with respect to that, or is the direction sufficient? Okay, thank you.
Yes, as Commissioner Hernandez said, I'm sorry, Rick, now I'm forgetting which was scenario 1 and which was scenario 2, but one of them has the benefit of being decisive.
Yes.
21 controversial.
Option 2 is ratifying 21 out of the 22 with Grinelli as a backup, and then allowing the applicant to, who's denied, to file a timely appeal, which city staff will help her through the process, and there's no fee for that. So I think that from a due process perspective, I think we've dotted the I's and crossed the T's, and I think this is the most, unless there's any other discussion on this, I think I'm ready to make a motion.
Yes, I think we would, everyone would welcome that now, Rick.
I'd like to make a motion to ratify 21 of the 22 projects with Grinelli as a backup and move the 111 Red Hawk project to deny it at this time.
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Gorn. Oh, Jill, I'm sorry.
We want to make sure you put in the record that Grinelli is the in the holding position.
Yes.
He
You
stated
did.
that.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm typing too fast. I apologize.
Okay. Mhm.
And
Okay.
through the chair, I would just
Sure.
want to make language clarification, so this is properly squared up with respect to the code, which would be to modify Exhibit A in the attached resolution to remove 111 Red Hawk Court from receiving a measure D allocation, and to put Grinelli in a backup position should 111 Red Hawk Court not move forward. So I don't want to couch this as a denial.
I would like to amend my motion. I would like to modify Exhibit A in the attached resolution to reflect the fact that we are not approving 111 Red Hawk at this time, and pursuant to Red Hawk ultimately not moving forward, Grinelli would be the next project in line.
Thank you.
There's no explicit time boundary on that, but I presume that Grinelli would move forward at the point when it was clear that there would be no appeal, or if the April deadline passes. Commissioner Gorn, are you still happy seconding
Sure.
Commissioner
Yes,
Hernandez's
that's fine.
motion?
That works for me. Yes, second.
Thank you. We can have a roll call, please, Bridget.
Yes, Commissioner Benjamin,
No.
Commissioner Gorn,
Yes.
Commissioner Hernandez,
Yes.
Vice Chair Polgar,
Yes.
and Chair Reddick.
Yes.
Motion moved.
Well, thank you, everybody. That was a fascinating discussion with contributions from lots of different people at staff. So thank you for that. Our next agenda item is our director's report.
All right, thank you. We will shake that one off for a second here while I find my summary. Agenda forecast for you. Your next meeting is April 13th, and we are on track for bringing back the short-term rental ordinance for what we hope will be a final study session. We have just about wrapped up our research on caps, which is what you asked us to do. And we're looking forward to finishing through that. 698 Terrace is an application for a new single-family home on, it's on the last lot of Terrace. Scott Phillips is the project planner, and he is preparing to bring that to you that same evening. We're assuming your study session on STRs is going to be quite a bit shorter than the first two because we're really kind of down to one topic. Let's see here. We've got the Creekside Affordable Housing Agreement is something I'm trying to finish up with our applicant to bring that to City Council. We believe we're going to have an appeal of Measure D item, and we'll be bringing that to City Council, and I'm ready to do that as quickly as possible. City Council, by the way, tomorrow is having their priority setting session, and I have just let it slip through my mind when it starts. I think it's at 11 o'clock, and it will be on Zoom, and all are welcome to participate in our virtual meeting. Yeah, 11 a.m. tomorrow. So hopefully some of you can pop in and out. City staff really enjoys hearing firsthand from council. So a lot of our staff members will be in the audience along with anyone else from the community who's going to listen in for working through these priorities. Let's see. That's about all that I have really firmed up. You have, you're going to have a busy year. So just, and we know your packet was big. We got that out Wednesday night, and then our hosting platform for the agenda had a big hiccup, and Bridget did absolutely everything she could for hours on end to try to get that to work, but it required intervention by the host to fix it. So we hope that you were able to get to your packet early. We are trying really hard to get you to a Tuesday or Wednesday packet, so you have a few days the week before the meeting, before your weekend. So if there's questions that come up in advance, you have more time to think about it, and we might have more time to do some work on those. So we'll keep our effort on that. And I don't have anything scheduled right now for, well, Brittany has an item and I can't remember what it is and when it is. So we can tell you about that next time. And there's always something. So anyway, thank you for tonight. And I think it covers our update.
Thank you, Jill, and thank you everybody for the early packets. I was able to do that workaround to get at the expanded packet. So thank you, Bridget, for all your efforts.
No problem.
Are there any planning commissioner communications to share? Well, if not, adjournment might make, oh, Commissioner Hernandez.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Have a motion to adjourn and a second. So we have a roll call vote?
Yes. Commissioner Benjamin?
Yes.
Commissioner Gorn?
Aye.
Commissioner Hernandez?
My band of pirates is growing. And it was Jason and the Argonauts.
It was Jason. Yeah,
Aye.
I knew it was Jason.
Vice Chair Polgar?
Yes.
And Chair Reddick?
What's the Greek for I? I'll just say yes.
Epsilon.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night,
all.
everyone.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Jill.
Be well.